that we're going to re-refer two bills, very controversial.
Move favorable.
So if you look at number 3, we can't just have the Senate President do it, we have to vote to re-refer after a certain date, which I didn't know until I was told about this by committee counsel. So there's a motion to re-refer 442 and 506. Any discussion? Seeing none, anybody object to the re-referral? Everyone will be recorded in the affirmative.
We're going to B and T.
B and T, money bags upstairs. Do you hear us? Okay. Let's go to our voting list. We can just work our way down. Well, does the committee council care how we handle this? Okay, let's just work our way down then. Ms. Morton.
Senate Bill 7, Invasive and Native Plants Classification, Listing, Use, and Sales and Use Tax. This bill requires the Maryland Department of Agriculture to classify as a Tier 1 invasive plant or a Tier 2 invasive plant each invasive plant species identified in the Plant Invaders of the Mid-Atlantic Natural Areas publication issued by the National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay.
The Department of Natural Resources must, 1, publish on its website a list of native plant species and identify which species may be used as an alternative to the use and planting of Tier 2 invasive species, and 2, notify nurseries, landscapers, plant wholesalers, and plant retailers of the bill's provisions. State agencies and entities that receive state funds must prioritize, whenever possible, the planting of native plant species. Finally, the bill exempts the sale of native plant species from the state sales and use tax. I should note that this bill has a secondary assignment in B&T, presumably to deal with that tax provision. There are no amendments.
Okay. Let's get it in front of us. Is there a motion in favor? It's been moved favorable. Is there a second? Second. Okay. Discussion. Here's the time to ask questions if you're not sure or whatever. Okay. Seeing no discussion, the motion is favorable. Would anybody like to vote in opposition to a favorable as we send it to the floor? Seeing none, Senate Bill 7 passes to the floor.
No, it goes to B&T.
I'm sorry, to second referral to budget and tax. Is Jared with us? Okay, we have some people we don't want to hold up, so I am going to change the order a little bit. We're going to take up 101 and 163. I'm sorry.
15?
Right, and 15.
239.
Fine, 239. So we'll take up the election bills. Let's start with Senate Bill 15. Ms. Goodman.
Senate Bill 15, Election Law, Campaign Finance Enforcement. This bill increases the statute of limitations on election law violations from 3 years to 4 years, authorizes the Office of State Prosecutor to issue a civil citation for late filings for the contribution disclosure statement from persons doing public business under Title 14. It increases the monetary penalties for filers of the contribution disclosure statement to $25,000 from $1,000 to mirror the penalty for criminal violation of Title 13, which are campaign finance provisions. And it broadens the applicability of, adds record-keeping requirements to, and increases the amount of the fine for criminal violations from $1,000 to $25,000, and authorizes the State Board of Elections to impose civil penalties for specified violations under provisions in the General Provisions article requiring disclosure of contributions by persons providing compensation to lobbyists. I don't have any amendments, and there was no opposition recorded at the hearing.
Is there a motion and then I'll take the conversation? It's been moved. Is there a second? Is there a second? Second. In front of us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I prepared a series of amendments for this bill, and I had to speak to the amendment office, and they promised they'll be here, and I don't see it. Could we?
Let's at least try to, we'll put it behind the other three. Maybe it'll get here. If we have to hold it, we have to hold it. That's all.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
I don't want to use up a hold. I just wanted to make sure the amendments are here, and
Well-
they really were working on it.
Okay, well,
That's
like
all.
I said, we've got three other bills.
Yeah.
It'll either reach us or we'll do a hold. I don't see any other options.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll come back to that if we can. Then we'll go to 101.
Senate Bill 101, Election Law, Contested Elections. This bill establishes and modifies specified thresholds relating to when a candidate or a registered voter, in the case of a ballot question, can petition for a recount, and when a county, as opposed to a petitioner, must pay for the cost of a recount. The bill also modifies the definitions of contribution and expenditure under the state campaign finance law to include funding associated with contesting an election, a recount, or a judicial challenge. And under provisions that apply to publicly financed candidates, the bill establishes provisions governing a contested election committee and prohibits a person from accepting a donation or making a disbursement related to a contested election unless the person establishes a contested election committee and discloses donations received and disbursements made by the committee. There are no amendments, there is no opposition, and this bill was passed last year out of the Senate.
Okay, is there a motion? It's been moved. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. We passed it last year. There were some challenges with the House last year on a number of election bills. It's before us again in basically the same posture. Is there discussion? Is there discussion? Seeing none, would anybody like to be recorded in the opposition? Seeing none, it'll pass to the floor unanimously. Okay, let's go to 163.
So Senate Bill, just to start, you have a separate packet with amendments, and those all go to Senate Bill 163. So Senate Bill 163, Election Law, Ballots, Processing and Reporting Requirements. This emergency bill makes changes to the state election law relating to the start of absentee ballot processing during an election, a voter's ability to correct a failure to sign the oath on an absentee ballot envelope, instances where a local board of elections receives more than one absentee ballot from the same individual, or receives an absentee ballot and a provisional ballot from the same individual, and reporting requirements for an election results by precinct. The amendments that you have, we'll go to the first set. There's two amendments here. The first set is from Senator Kagan. This set of amendments, there's a reprint. I didn't number the pages, but there is a reprint that shows you the provisions in there. They show and revise various definitions relating to canvassing absentee ballot or canvassing ballots. They require certain activities to occur within the time frame of certain business days versus just regular days. And it adds email to the list of methods to communicate with a local board of elections for the purposes of curing absentee ballot issues. Do you want to discuss them in turn, or do you want to discuss them all at the same time? Okay.
Yeah, I need a motion. It's been moved, it's been seconded. There's two things to understand with the bill. First of all, the thing of curing, if something comes in and someone forgot their signature. We passed this last year. It should have passed last year. It didn't. The House had disagreement with how many days and other things got in the way. So that part of it we passed last year. The second part is to continue the practices and processes that were used in 2020, which had record turnout, and the election was handled very well, and most surveys and polls said it was done very well, and the public was very happy. So that's the two main components, if I had to summarize this at 30,000 feet. So that's the bill. Yes, Senator.
To clarify with Jared here that we are codifying the procedure that had been taken place at the last presidential election. Is that accurate? The curing of ballots?
Yes, I mean, 2020 was a very successful election with a high mail-in ballots received and processed. And so this would be just codifying the practices that existed in 2020.
Under what authority did you cure?
Senator, I just want to clarify before we go further.
Yeah,
We didn't have the curing language in 2020.
we didn't have the curing language, but I wanted
But
to
the-
clarify,
we're-
under what authority was the curing done?
Jared?
Well, at one point, we were operating under an executive order, a state of emergency to ensure, I would say, an election and making sure it was a successful election. So, you know, in 2020, you had a all-male primary election, and for the general, you had a hybrid approach between with 50% people voting by mail. And so you had a lot of people doing that for the first time, and it was under that authority that we could operate with the curing. And they were passed through regulations and are still implemented as regulations for the state board.
Okay, so your authority came from the State Board of Elections under the governor's emergency order?
Well, at one point, I think how we conducted the election, it came from that, but we used our authority as an administrative agency to adopt curing regulations.
Okay. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any, is there any change to when they can count the ballots in this? Absentee ballots?
Yes.
Could you hear
so-
the question?
Yeah, you can start changing the bill itself. It wasn't in the amendment, but Senator Kagan's bill changed it to 8 days prior to the start of early voting.
Okay.
Current law places it after Election Day, the Wednesday after Election Day.
Okay, and so when you canvass them, at that point, you're separating the signature from the ballot. So you can't put them back together. In other words, when it's together, I can associate that with you.
Correct,
And when you take it out of the envelope, we don't know who cast that ballot.
correct.
So in this bill, is it separating the envelopes prior to Election Day?
So they begin processing, meaning but they take in the absentee ballot, they review it to make sure that it meets all the requirements, meaning the oath is signed on the back of the envelope, and then that person is also a registered voter. And once that process is done, the signature verification, then at that point, they will begin to separate the ballots from the envelopes. And then the ballot can never be reassociated with the actual voter.
Okay, and I think I remember from the hearing, they're not tabulated, they're just put in a pile? Or you actually count them at that point?
We're doing what was done in 2020. If either Ms. Goodman or Jared can answer that.
So the local boards told me what the process was is after separation, then the batched ballots, they're sent to a scanner. They're scanned on a particular scanner at that time. And then at the end of each canvassing day, they close out the election machine, meaning they hit a button that says that tabulates those results. It gets stored on a memory card. The memory card and a report gets sent out from that, and they get stored in the local Board of Elections office securely, and none of that gets reported until after Election Day.
But I've gone to election polls afterwards, and I've seen that process, and they put a tape up and it shows you the counts for candidate A, candidate B, and all that. Do they have access to that? Or
They
is it
don't do
just-
that for absentee ballots. They only do that for early voting. The number of ballots would be there, but not the results.
Okay, so it would just say there was 10,000, it wouldn't say,
Correct.
and then that would be calculated on election day? When would you first see the results of that? Who won that precinct or whatever?
That's after Election Day.
Okay, so people in the election
Jared, you
place
look like you
wouldn't
wanna
know the
say
results of things coming in 8 days before. They wouldn't know that Senator Pinsky was winning this precinct or whatever.
The only person who may know that would be the person who's collecting that report from the unit, but that gets securely stored by the local Board of Elections. And the information gets uploaded to the State Board of Elections server, but none of that, but what I understand is it doesn't actually tabulate all of that out until after Election Day.
Okay, so one person would do it. Is there any way we could put something in here, they have to take an oath not to share that or something as part of their training or?
It's a good question. Is that already in law or not?
Whether they have to take an oath?
I don't believe it's in law, but they do sign non-disclosure agreements.
And those non-disclosure specify that they can't share any information until after Election Day?
Prior to the results are released, and we don't release results until after all the polls are closed.
Okay,
We
you're
do the
saying
same thing with early voting.
You're saying it's handled under current, that they're not allowed to do it, and they've agreed to that?
That's a question to you, Jared.
Well, I guess we make everyone sign a non-disclosure agreement not to disclose any of the results prior to when the polls are closed. And that's current practice.
Okay.
Carosa.
I didn't know if we were doing this by sections. My question has more to do by the election results by precincts, so, okay.
It's
So
the bill, we didn't adopt the amendments yet, but I think it's all in front of us. So proceed, please.
So, the bill requires now, the bill, SB 163, requires the reporting by precincts, correct?
Is it in the amendment or in the bill?
Either Jared or
Yeah,
Senator Kim.
yes.
Yes.
The answer
It's
is
going- Yes. we
The
have to-
answer is yes.
Okay, so, and maybe my question is, I had heard from one of my local election board members that this was going to be a significant cost at the local level. And they talked about more ballots that have to be pre-proofed, more ballot styles, meaning more printing runs, difficult for early voting judges to hand out correct ballots. So I'm trying to understand with the change of precinct reporting, if you could walk me through, what does that actually mean at the local level of what they did in the past and what they would be doing now?
I'm going to let Jared speak and then the vice chair, the sponsor. Currently,
So, the difference.
hold one, Jared, hold 1 second. Currently, prior to early voting, you had 20 or 30 polls and you knew where you did well, where you didn't, where people liked you, where they didn't like you, or voted for someone else. With early voting, that became a problem. And a lot of people still wanted to be able to track where they had work to do, where their opponent was very popular and they weren't. But with early voting, that became a problem. So I think this is the change of that. So early voting can also be brought back to precincts. Let me have Jared and then I'll go to the vice chair. Jared?
So one thing is that we did do it in the 2020 general election. We did do results by precinct for absentee, mail-in ballots. So it does increase the number because instead of generalized ballot styles for absentee voters. It drills it down to the precincts. And so there's more ballot styles to be mailed out for absentee voters on that level as well. So that's the big difference there. But we did successfully do it in the 2020 general election.
Was there a cost at the local level?
I would assume that there was cost, but I don't have any figures. If it was more or less, I can't answer that.
I'm not clear, but.
Okay, Vice Chair.
Thank you. I'm just going to briefly add on for Senator Carrozza. First off, at our hearing after the 2020 elections, a lot of us expressed our interest in getting, for exactly what the chairman said, a lot of us wanted that information. Advocates wanted it. Both political parties found it useful. It helps with get out the vote for parties and interest groups and stuff. Second, it helps identify if there's fraud or errors. If you're looking at a whole big number, and Senator Washington is a statistician, but it's easy to say, okay, normally there are 300 votes in this precinct, but this year there are only 62. Why is that if everywhere else there went up or something? So that's another thing. And the last thing I want to flag is that every state that does mail-in voting, exclusively mail-in voting, reports by precincts. So it's not that hard, and we've already done it. It was the SBE staff that decided that it didn't need to be done in 20, and it was our interest that that be changed after the primary election, and so it was changed for the general. Thank you.
Senator Simon Ayer.
Just two questions, just make sure we're good here. It says that on page 2 of 6, line 24, it talks about if the ballot is rejected, and it says they have until 10 a.m. the day that 10 days after the election. I'm assuming that's when the election gets certified or something? Okay. And then the signature, you're asking them to send a signature via text, email, or whatever, a picture of it. And I'm just curious what the purpose of the picture is. Because basically there's no verification of the signature, it's just acknowledging I signed it, I guess.
Jared, you want to respond to that? Did you hear it?
I kind of did. There is no signature verification, right, in current law. So how we get the signature back that's missing on the oath will be processed the same way as any signature that we receive currently.
So I guess the requirement is you have to have a signature, so that fulfills the requirement.
Right, yes. You have
Okay.
to have a signature. The oath has to be signed.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay.
For a valid absence, for a valid mail-in ballot.
Okay, we put the bill in front of us. The underlying language were the amendments. Let's just get them on the floor. Somebody want to move the amendment? The amendments have been moved and they've been seconded. Back to you, Senator Gallion.
Thank you, and it's been a couple years now, so just to refresh my memory, some of this for Jared. So in 2020, the primary, when everybody was mailed a ballot, my wife and I had recently moved, so actually we got mailed a ballot at our new house and our old house. Obviously, we're honest, we don't want to break the law, we only sent in the one that was mailed to our new address. If someone that was not as honest mailed in both, and you know, it gets mailed in, you open it up, and the ballot gets separated from that envelope, and then say a week later they mail in, you know, the second one. Would that be caught? I mean, you'd have to go off the envelope, correct? Because once the ballot's out of the envelope, there's no way to track that. So
He has an answer for that. Jared,
Good.
did you hear the question?
I did hear the question, but I guess there's two presumptions there. One, that you would receive two mail-in ballots. So now we're not, in 2020, the primary election, that was an all-male election. We sent out mail-in ballots to everyone. They didn't request it. Now, we go into 2022, what we did was what we did in the general of 2020, which is we mailed out applications to every individual registered voter in the state of Maryland. So now you would receive an application, at which point, if you mailed back the application to receive a mail-in ballot, we would only mail you one.
Okay.
So there's
So in other
point
words,
there.
But
this wouldn't be an
hold on,
issue unless we had
hold
an
on,
issue
hold
like
on.
that primary.
Hold on.
where-
It's my understanding, this is Mike corrected, hold on, Jared. When the ballot comes in and it's taken from the envelope, it's my understanding, it's entered in the database, not how you voted, but they received the ballot from you. So if something subsequent comes in, like any challenge ballot, they know that you've already voted, or you've submitted a ballot to vote.
They do that off of the envelope, though?
Jared?
Yes.
So do they-
So the envelope comes in, you, as a registered voter, would have been identified as a person to receive an absentee ballot or a mail-in ballot. As soon as the ballot comes in, it gets scanned into our database, the statewide voter registration database, to check it in, and then it becomes processed so that it would be received.
Great. So how long do they keep those, just the envelopes for like evidence or whatever? Do you keep them a certain amount of time in case an issue came up where somebody did try to do something wrong? I mean, what's the process of that?
No, once it's in the database, they have the evidence.
Okay, so they're not keeping the hard copy envelope, in other words.
Well, they're separated from the ballot anyway,
Right.
at that point.
Yeah, well, my concern, once the ballot's out of that envelope, the envelope's really your only evidence. Well, you're saying it's in a database, so I guess that would,
That's the very first thing they do.
Okay.
So that says you voted, anything that comes subsequent, whether it's mailed, whether you show up, you're pulling a hustle, and they already have that you've already had a vote entered into the database.
okay.
Jared, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Right. And once they get into it, then they begin the canvassing of those ballots. And we keep all ballot and election related materials for, I believe, 22 months.
Okay, on the amendments, I'm sorry, Senator Carrozza?
I'm not sure if my question applies to the amendments or the bill in general.
Want to be clear on this, and we're all at least understanding the same thing.
I'm trying to understand have there been instances where results got out before the polls closed because we did the counting in advance?
Jared?
I was trying to figure, it got a little staticky for me on that one.
Senator, lean into your mic and.
Sorry, I'm trying to understand if in 2020, were there instances where results got out before the polls closed on Election Day because we did the early counting?
I have been informed that there was an incident in one of the counties that it did occur. It was by error, and that person was subsequently let go. It was not done in a malicious or an intentional manner, and it only occurred once for one day in the entire 2020 election, from the primary and the general. But that is my understanding.
So just to follow up on that. So it was the count from one machine off of one day.
In one county.
That is what that is what I'm aware of.
Okay.
I just think that's important to note since obviously it occurred then. And you can, in that particular case, that was the situation, but you know, there is a reality that when you count the votes ahead of time, this is what can happen as far as the results getting out before the polls close.
Human error and on one machine on one day in one county, which was horrible. But the other 15 or 18 days, multiple machines in 24 counties, that didn't happen.
Senator Carozza, to use your words, though, the results didn't get out. So nothing was in the press, nothing got out to the public, nothing was informed to the candidates, and as the chair said, it was just a really fractional thing. The key thing that I think we want to remember is that we're balancing the demands on our local boards of elections, the crazy hours, the increased number of votes, and voters and press and candidates and parties' interest in getting results back fast. And so that's why starting the process early and making sure that it's locked up tight and people are not sleep deprived, working at 5 in the morning, 3 nights in a row or something, makes sure that we have, again, continue to have really solid elections here in Maryland.
Let me just add, I don't know if this is just clarifying or it's advocacy. If you don't start till after 8 o'clock on election night, and you've got to do 20 or 50,000 ballots and also audit them, it's unclear how many days after election day the results would come in. And so it's a judgment call. I mean, are people going to trust you telling them 5 days later, or letting the local boards of election, which actually endorse this, Mayo from 24 counties endorse this approach, which they did in 2020. Amendments before us, they are the underlying language in the reprint in front of you. Would anybody like to be noted in the opposition to the amendments?
Just want to make sure I'm clear what we're voting on. There were 4 parts to the overall bill, right? The start of the absentee ballot processing, the correction of if somebody failed to sign the absentee ballot envelope. Not sure what the third one is, and the fourth one was the precinct, reporting by precinct. I was trying to understand how the amendments affect those 4 parts specifically.
So I'm going to try here, Senator Carozza, but maybe Jared or Stacy or someone else wants to jump in. But this bill, as amended, is the simplest way of continuing the 2020 elections that went well in Maryland and making sure this is an emergency bill, that we are not adding drama or trauma or regulations or craziness to our local boards of elections when they're going to be facing a primary like 20 minutes from now. So we just want to we want to give them the capacity and the bandwidth to run a great election in June and then in November. And that's what this bill will help do.
It's hard separating out the amendment. With the amendments, if we can adopt the amendments, this will replicate what we did in 2020 in the general election. I don't want to simplify it.
In those 4 areas that we just talked.
Yeah, it'll, yes.
And that's been, Jared, that's been supported by all 24 local boards of elections?
Mayo did support this bill. I mean, I think Mayo is very concerned about the fact that there's going to be not enough time if we do not start to canvass before Election Day in order to get the results finalized and certified by the deadlines. Additionally, the idea that, county candidates, take office on the first Monday in December, I think December 1st. These are deadlines that are set, and, if we have an overwhelming number of people using mail-in voting, which in all likelihood will be increased from 2018 levels and 2020 levels. It could be the same, higher, that we would not have the ability to make sure to process and to complete the canvass in time. And this will allow the local boards the flexibility to begin the canvass and to help procure ballots to make sure that everyone that has a right to vote is not denied the vote on a technicality, and allows the local boards to engage, to make sure that if there's any sort of review or processing that needs to be done, that can all be taken place in the appropriate time, so that we can make sure that the election is certified by the deadlines.
That's very helpful explanation. And my last question would be, was any consideration given to maybe tightening up any processes to prevent something like that one example that happened? Is there anything we can do to, so that there's basically confidence of the voters in the system, that even, I mean, I think it's really important that as we do this, that the voters have the confidence that if these votes are going to be counted early, that's secure and confidential. So is there anything, Jared, that you could propose that would provide a little bit more assurance for the voters? So even though it was one situation in 2020, but we know that it does open up the possibility.
Well, I can tell you this here, that I know that all 24 election directors are probably either watching this or going to be briefed about this. They take their jobs very seriously. They're, as we all know, they're very dedicated professionals on this here. And, they hear this, and they were upset about that incident across the board. And, when there's one mistake or a black eye, it affects them all, so that they're ready now to engage and make sure that they've tightened all the procedures, and that type of incident, as unfortunate as it is, they're going to make sure that it's not repeated in the future, even by accident or not. So I know that they're working on that.
I have
right
no
now.
doubt about their leadership and integrity. I think the question is, maybe for the bill sponsor, is there anything to entertain to maybe tighten up, or anything else that we can do on the reassurance so people have confidence in the counting? And I put that out there. Our best, as we know, our best ideas come from those at the local level that are handling this. Jared just mentioned that maybe, and I know they meet on a regular basis, maybe they have their own recommendations on how to make sure it's secure, and that way we maybe restore, some confidence when you move forward with the bill.
Two things. One, if you have a proposal, we're here to hear it, number one.
I would defer to Jared and to the local experts. I'm not an expert on this.
I mean, is there training, or should we require training? I mean, Jared,
Like I said, I believe that the locals, will be, making sure that whatever training, or I don't think it needs to be legislated at that level there. And, if there is anything that the locals and the state need to do, or to, I would say, codify, we have it through the regulatory process, so that we can,
Okay.
whatever we can do, we can either discuss it at that level. But I think that, the intent is there. We know that it is. I mean, it's clear in the language of the amendment here, is that we're not to release any vote totals prior to election day, prior to the close of the polls. So, I mean, those are just, we've been doing this now with early voting successfully, because we started the canvass of those prior to the close of the polls, so that we can release them as soon as the polls close. These are things that, as processes that the locals and the state have been a part of and have been doing many years now, and with the professionalism that we engage here, I think that it's best handled at that level, either through regulations or through policy, rather than through statutory initiatives.
Well, let me ask you a quick question, both to Senator Carrozza and to Jared. I don't know if you have the bill in front of you, Jared. One section says the local board may not release absentee ballot vote totals before Election Day. If we were to say a local board or its employees, I mean, does that help or not? I don't, you know.
Intention by including employees strengthens it, yes. And what I'm hearing is a reassurance from Jared as far as, I guess, what can be done at the, through regulation and not legislation. But that, to me, I think any type of strengthening in the language, I think helps with voter confidence.
Jared, does that help or hurt or
I
have
mean,
no
I
effect?
guess we've always assumed when you make a law about the local board or the state
Right.
board, we know that it's never the five-person board. It's always,
Okay.
the staffers there. So, but if that, if that's something that makes everyone feel confident that it's, the local board, its employees, and, I guess that if that helps this to make sure that it assuages any fears, then I'm fine with that addition of it. But it's usually, I mean, I guess Stacy can tell you that, like, when we say local boards, it usually implies or it means the staff as well.
And, I had Senator Washington, then Senator Riley.
Thank you, Chair. This is in support of the amendments and the bill. Oh, it's red? Okay. The amendments and the bill. I was going to make the point about, not tabulating before. And also, I believe you've said this multiple times in terms of taking the recommendations of the locals. Mayo is asking us to do this. So it seems like they're asking us to do it. And so it would seem like at least this part of it, we're asking, we're moving forward on that. So I just wanted to express my support of the bill. And additionally, I agree with not over-regulating it in statute, and trusting that the regulations that will promulgate it will be supported. And finally, one of the ways that we can ensure that our constituents trust our process is for us to trust our process and to assure our constituents that the process is fair and equitable. So, thank you. So I encourage us to vote favorable on the amendments.
Senator Riley, then we'll take the amendments and adopt the amendments. Senator Riley.
Thank you very much. Again, Jared, what we're doing is we're codifying the practice that happened 2 years ago, number one. Is that accurate?
Overall, yes. I mean, that's the general intent of this bill.
Yeah. And number two is it my understanding correct that the members of the State Board of Elections and every county board of elections has a majority members of the party of the governor?
That is correct.
So we have more Republicans than Democrats looking over the shoulder of the process and the staff all across the state.
Yep, even in Baltimore.
In every county.
Yes, it's true. Yes, you do.
Is that right, Jared? Shake your head, yes.
Yes.
Thank
yes,
you very much.
sorry, I was just like, I didn't know if that was but yes, right now, it's the majority of the board is always made up of the party of the governor.
Thank you. Just one point of clarification. The results wouldn't be broadcast or let out until the polls close, correct? Now,
That's our policy.
Okay.
Right. We never release results until the polls are
it
closed.
might have been 2018, I can't remember, but one of those years, like in one of the counties, that they extended it past 8 p.m., I believe. So if that happens, you have to wait till whatever that last county is to close before they let any of the results out, correct?
Our policy is to make sure that all the polls, all the voting has ceased before we release results.
Okay, so if one of these drags out till 9 p.m., then it's good, but it won't be till all the polls and the entire state are closed before those, the early voting and the mail-in results would be broadcast.
That's been our policy, yes.
Thank you.
That's been our policy regardless of this election, too.
Okay, because earlier it said something about election day. I just want to make sure it's clear that was actually when the polls are all closed. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, and I'll be brief, and I thank you. It's really to try to understand what we're voting on. I would offer the amendment to just add "and employees," just to be literal, so I'd like to add that. And I just have a question again to understand the process. Do they start the canvassing? Can they start the canvassing without tabulating? I'm just trying to understand that process, how that works.
And Jared, correct me if I'm wrong, they are part and parcel of the same process. Canvassing is taking them out of the envelope, inputting it in the database so they know that person has voted once. It's in the machine. Then when they get a chunk of these, they scan them for that day, and then they close out that machine for that day, and they take the results, they upload it to a secure server, and then the memory stick or whatever it is and the printout is put in a secure place, and they do that for each machine every day as they're doing the
So what's the
canvass.
difference between canvassing and tabulating, if you had to define it?
Jared, the
Well, there
question,
it's defined in the statute.
Stacy?
Right there in the bill, if you take a look at the reprint of the amendment, it defines canvass as means the entire process of vote tallying, vote tabulation, and vote verification, culminating in the production and certification of the official election results. So canvass is the start to finish voting, and then you process, and then
So I guess I was going to ask Jared,
tally,
the
and then you
literal
tabulate.
process of canvassing, the literal process of tabulating.
I think the chair defined the process of a canvass
Where you,
all the way through, and then, and then tabulation is that printout and the actual thumb drive.
okay, so canvassing is opening, count, getting it all in the system, and tabulating is you got the count and you're sending it and closing it down.
Right, because tabulation is, the aggregation of all the votes to produce a vote total. So that report is the production of the vote total. So that's that report is the vote tabulation.
Okay. Thank you.
I called for the question. No, I said I was calling for the questions.
Before you is the underlying language in the reprint from the vice chair, along with adding the words, the local board and its employees may not. So that's the amendment. Discussion? Seeing none, will anybody like to be recorded in the opposition to that amendment? Okay, the amendment's adopted. There's one other amendment. In that same packet on page, non-numbered page, called the Pinsky Amendment.
Yes.
Ms. Goodman?
Sure. So the State Board of Elections had some concerns about the local board, the burden on a local board in making this report. So they suggested these amendments, which essentially would shift the burden of reporting the precinct results from the local boards to the State Board of Elections. So the information would be published only by the state board and not published by the local boards, because the length of the reports as we had it drafted in this bill would have been burdensome. So that's essentially what it does. It doesn't take out the requirement to not have precinct results. It just shifts the burden from the local boards to the State Board of Elections.
Anybody want to move that amendment? It's been moved, it's been seconded. Again, it's to reduce the work of the local jurisdiction, and the state will take care of it. But we need that report. Discussion. Seeing none, anybody want to vote against it? If not, that is adopted. So we have the bill as amended before you. Further discussion. Okay, would anybody like to be recorded in the negative on sending this bill to the floor? Okay, then the bill is recorded as unanimous and sent to the floor. Okay, we have one, yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Senator Lamb has a similar bill we haven't heard yet, but we want to get moving. We don't know what the House is going to do. It's an emergency bill. We want to give the local boards time to do any changes. So it is an emergency bill. We want to get rocking and rolling. So while we're moving without hearing his bill, it's now in the same posture, almost literally, as his bill. So I think Senator Lamb wants to be added. Anybody else want to be added? Senator Washington, Senator Hester. I don't know if I'm on or not. You can add me too. Senator Ellis as well.
It would be nice to make it bipartisan if anybody's colleagues.
They know. Any objection? That's adopted.
Can I just thank the Maryland Association of Election Officials for their efforts in working with us on this bill, too. They've been really helpful. Thank you.
Hopefully they heard that. Let's go to 239.
Senate Bill 239, Election Law, Campaign Finance, Protection of a Contributor. This bill prohibits a person from using any contributor information from any report or statement required under Title 13 related to campaign finance of the election law article for commercial solicitation purposes, or from publishing any contributor information from any report or statement required under Title 13 in newspapers, magazines, books, websites, or other similar media for the purpose of facilitating commercial solicitation. There are no amendments, there was no opposition, and I believe we passed this bill out of the Senate last year in this same posture.
Seeing none, does anybody want to be recorded in the negative on the bill? If not, this will go to the floor unanimously, 239. Senator Ellis, I want to free up a couple people, Jared and Ross. I assume I haven't seen anybody run in here with a pile of papers. We'll just take it up next time. This is 15. I don't know if there's another option, Senator. Okay, we'll take it up next week.
Next week.
And I know the State Board wants this. We'll take it up next week. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Demarinis. Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Get some dinner. See your kids. Okay. That's a hold. Okay, let's go back. So that takes us to 32, Senator Carrozza, Worcester County.
All right, Senate Bill 32, Worcester County Public Safety Buildings Used for Agritourism. This bill exempts an agricultural building in Worcester County used for agritourism from obtaining a change of occupancy permit if, 1, the building's use of agritourism does not require it to be occupied by more than 200 people at any one time, and 2, the width of the egress for the building meets specified building code standards. This would bring them in line with 11 other counties that currently authorize this. There is an amendment in your packet being offered by Senator Carrozza. It's on page 3 of the main voting packet that you received yesterday and should have been distributed today. All it does is change the bill's effective date to June 1st.
Okay, I'm going to assume that's a motion on both, and that's a motion on the bill and on the amendment. Any objection to the amendment? The amendment's adopted. The bill as amended.
We're just tagging along with a whole lot of other good friends. I think it's a reasonable bill.
Okay. Anybody wish to be recorded in the negative? Seeing none, the bill goes to the floor unanimously. Next.
Senate Bill 50, higher education, return to Peace Corps volunteers, in-state tuition. You passed this favorably and unanimously last week. Unfortunately, I forgot that there were co-sponsor amendments, so we have to come back and vote on those co-sponsor amendments. There adds 3 co-sponsors, Senator Lamb, Lee, and West.
Any objection to adopting that amendment? Any objection to using the same vote as we passed it last week? Done.
Senate Bill 73, General Assembly, special election to fill a vacancy in office. This proposed constitutional amendment, if approved by the voters at the next general election, alters the procedure for filling a vacancy in the office of state senator or delegate. It requires the governor to, immediately upon a vacancy in the office of state senator or delegate, if the vacancy occurs on or before a specified date, to declare a special primary and general elections to fill the vacancy. The special primary and general elections must take place during a regular statewide primary and general elections that occur in the second year of a term. The governor must appoint an eligible individual to fill the vacancy until a successor is elected. The proposed constitutional amendment exempts a special election to fill a vacancy in a specified office from the quadrennial schedule for the election of state and county officers. There is one amendment that adds Senator Huff as a co-sponsor. This was passed in 2021 out of the Senate with no amendments.
Motion. It's been moved by Senator Lamb. Is there a second by Senator Riley? Discussion. There's a sponsor amendment. Any objection to adding Huff? Okay, so the
He
bill.
never sees, I'm gonna come up with a thing.
You
my
wanna-
light on.
You want to talk or you want to have your name amended?
Yes, both.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. Senator Lamb, when Stacy just read, she said that the governor would appoint from qualified individuals. I assume that we are not changing the process now where the party committees recommend their folks and the governor chooses from a list. It's not just random other people, right? Okay, just checking because the way it was read. And then, yes, I would love to join as a co-sponsor if you'll have me. Thank you. Colleagues, would you let me
Okay.
know?
We've added without objection Huff and Kagan as co-sponsors. The bill as amended, yeah, that's a tough bunch. That's a reason to stay off, I think. Just kidding. For those of you out there in TV land. Okay, the bill is amended. Further discussion? Will anybody like to be recorded in the negative? Seeing none, the bill goes unanimously to the floor. That takes care of 73. Let's go to 86.
Senate Bill 86, Department of Natural Resources, Lease Agreements, Trail Access Provision. This bill requires that whenever the Department of Natural Resources leases any state-owned property under its jurisdiction and control to any lessee, the lease must include a provision that requires the lessee to, 1, maintain a border around the property sufficient to allow unobstructed access to trailheads by trail users and first responders, and 2, ensure that the border remains free of obstruction at all times. At least once each year, the Secretary of Natural Resources must submit a report of all leases executed by the department to the Department of General Services.
Is there a motion?
Favorable.
I just have one, either to the sponsor or to the council. How do we know if this is, will we know if this is being observed, implemented? I mean, will we hear from hikers? I'm just trying to understand, given we've had a little problem with enforcement in a few agencies, I think it's a good idea. There's a report. I thought I was about to read that the Secretary of DNR will walk through all of these trails to make sure you can get to the trailhead. and again, it's just, it's a serious question, but I'm not sure what kind of answer I expect. On this issue? Okay, if you don't mind, we'll go to Senator Gallion.
So in the past, years ago, I've rented some state park ground for cutting hay on there. So if they're required to mow, I mean, that'll reduce the amount. If you go all the way around, I mean, that's taking out a good. Well, but it's on, you just gotta get closer, I think.
Sorry, I believe the bill says to enable access to the trailhead. So you are responsible then for mowing just to the trailhead, to allow somebody to get access to the trail?
But DNR would be though, right? So, I mean, would they have to hire contractors or, I mean, I don't know how much they do already. I know we honestly have some ground that seems like they never keep up on mowing and stuff. I just wonder if it'll, you know, what's going to force them to get it done and how much it'll cost.
Can council help?
All the bill says is it would have to be a requirement of the lease agreement, so that DNR would have to put in the lease that you'd be required, that you as the lessee would be required to maintain that border. I will say it is a little bit, the language is a little ambiguous. It says maintain a border around the property sufficient to allow unobstructed access.
The intent was not to do a
all the way
complete
around.
border. So if we want to clarify, I'm totally happy with that.
And then also if it was just, you know, twice a year, I mean, these properties are probably getting cut twice a year anyway, so, you know, I don't know if it might actually already be kind of covered that way if they have to, you know, if they're mowing it by June and also again in September, maybe already getting done, honestly.
Senator Gallion, do you have suggested language?
Not really, I was just kind of asking.
Senator Hester, any thoughts, or you think it's, Ms. Morton?
I know I would hear about it because I hear about it now when it's not done. The horse community comes up to me, the bikers come up to me, they're like, hey, we can't get here, what can you do about it?
Senator Riley.
Ladies and gentlemen, we all know that these departments respond to complaints only. They're not particularly proactive. And this bill talks about a leasee, so they're going to be held accountable to all the provisions of the lease, the payment and the, you know, no hazardous activity and no fires and no the rest of it. And if a complaint comes in, the department then has the ability to go back and say, we're enforcing our lease. We have an example right here in Anne Arundel County at the Bay Bridge. Next time you're going this side of the bay, coming westbound, and you look to the left, there's actually a Westinghouse, Northrop Grumman research facility. And right next to it, just south of it, is about 500 acres that was transferred to the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and it is closed off. It's restricted. It's supposed to be used for educational purposes according to the original agreement, and nobody can get in there. So this is an example of how this lease should be used to allow public access to waterfront property. Now, the neighbors hate it because if it opens it up, people will come. But in any event, I think it's a reasonable request. A lot of these parks and natural resources areas are not suitable for picnicking. It's hiker, bikers, mountain bikes, things of that nature. And I'm very, very much supportive of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Please.
So I get what you're looking at, and I support that. The only question is on the enforcement, I think, which the chairman was talking about. And so my question is, a leasee does not maintain it. So does that break the lease? Do they give them a fine? Is there a notification process? You have 15 days to get this fixed, or your lease is broken? I mean, what's...
So I just they sent a packet out actually a year or two ago. I didn't actually bid on these things, but I think that's all specified in the pack they send out. So if you're not living up to your agreement, I can't remember if it's 30 days or whatever, but they can, remove you from being on that ground, from using that ground.
Okay, so that's built into the basics, okay.
Okay, anybody like to be recorded in the negative on the bill? If not, we will send it to. To the floor unanimously. Okay, next bill, please.
Senate Bill 103, State Board of Examiners for Audiologists, Hearing Aid Dispensers, Speech Language Pathologists, and Music Therapists revisions. This bill makes some forming changes to the board by adding music therapists and audiology assistants to several provisions, clarifying quorum requirements necessary, authorizing delegation, responsibilities requiring the board to grant preliminary approval before an out-of-state practitioner can practice without a license, and it adds disciplinary grounds to music therapists. And these conforming changes for context are in response to two pieces of legislation passed last year, granting licensure for audiology and music therapists.
I'll entertain a motion. It's been moved, it's been seconded, discussion, seeing none. Anybody like to record negative? Seeing none, it passes unanimously. Next, please.
Senate Bill 133, State Board for the Certification of Residential Child Care Program Professionals, Membership and Official Seal. This bill reduces the composition of the Board for Certification of Residential Child Care Program Professionals from 12 to 11, and the board members appointed from 6 to 5 by removing the sub-cabinet for youth member. It also removes the requirement for the board to adopt a seal. There's no opposition. There is one amendment included in your packet. This is an amendment from Senator Kagan that removes the requirement that a board member to sit upon the board has to be a United States citizen.
Okay. First, let's get the bill before us. Motion on the bill. Senator Washington moves. Senator Patterson seconds. Senator Kagan moves her amendment. Senator Washington seconds it. You want to explain your amendment?
Sure. Sorry. Thanks to legal counsel, we have learned that almost none of our boards actually require American citizenship. It does require Maryland residents, which I think is important. There are a lot of child care providers that are not yet citizens, and I think they need a voice on this board, and only one seat perhaps, but I think they should be represented. So I move the amendment.
So just to understand the amendment, it's not requiring somebody to be non-citizen, it just says that they don't have to be. Okay.
Sorry. So on page 2, line 16, each board member shall, and it says be a United States citizen, and then it says have resided in the state for at least 1 year before the appointment to the board. So it would just take out citizenship, but they would still have to live here.
Senator Washington.
Thank you. I was going to clarify that. This is a friendly amendment. Citizenship is not required to be a provider, so there you go.
Bill as amended, this is 133 on providers and certification of residential child care. Anybody want to be recorded in the negative? Seeing none, it'll go to the floor unanimously, 133. Okay, 178, is that right? Yep.
Senate Bill 178, Program Open Space, Local Projects, Federal Funds. This is a departmental bill from the Department of Natural Resources that repeals the requirement that an applicant for local program open space funding must certify on each application that the applicant has, one, applied for federal funds and received notification of federal approval or disapproval, two, applied for federal funds and has not received notification, or three, verified that the project is not eligible for federal funds. Instead, the bill would require that the applicant certify that the applicant has or has not received federal funds for the project.
I'll entertain a motion. Moved. Second, discussion, Senator.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as you know, you mentioned earlier, I have some open space bills, and received a lot of pushback saying the program is perfect and doesn't need any adjustment. And here we see this department bill making it better. So I just want to study it. I mean, I don't mind the bill, but, you know, I just want to bring out that issue right there. For what it's worth.
This is the bill that was held.
Yeah, this is a bill that was held.
I think
Okay.
he's just calling attention to the issue.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Understood. Further discussion on the bill? Would anybody like to be recorded in the negative on the bill? Saying not, it'll be reported to the floor as unanimous. 199.
So we voted, State Board of Architects Sunset Extension, SB 199. We moved favorable on this bill last week, and upon request, it is back before us for your consideration with an amendment. So to recall, the bill extends the termination provisions of the State Board of Architects to 2033 for 10 years. So there's one amendment from Senator Kagan, and this would limit the termination to 2025. So the board would be reinstated for 2 years only.
Any objection to the amendment? Some complaints came up and that weren't resolved, so let's hold them accountable like we did. And I have to tell you, I've gotten some interesting positive feedback from some other of our colleagues in the Senate for not just going along with it. So good work. Okay, any objection to the?
So you know, this is from 2016, and they have not resolved it.
Okay, so the amendment's adopted. Anybody wish to be recorded negative? If not, it'll be passed on to the floor, 199 unanimously. 206.
Senate Bill 206, Department of Agriculture, Spay Neuter Fund Extension. This is a departmental bill from the Department of Agriculture extending the termination date for the Spay Neuter Fund within the department for 10 years, from September 30th, 2022 to September 30th, 2032. There is an amendment in your packet on page 8. This amendment has been requested by the Department of Agriculture. It adds language requiring the department to report certain information related to the Spay Neuter Fund to the General Assembly on or before October 1st, 2022. This amendment conforms the bill to House Bill 191, which is not a cross-file, but it is a very similar bill. But it also adds language requiring the report to include additional sources of revenue for the fund.
First on the bill, second on the bill, the people want to move the amendment. Is that, okay, Senator Riley moves the amendments. Is there a second? I hadn't seen them before today, so I'm agnostic. It's been moved and second on the amendments. Discussion on the amendments? Seeing none, any objection? None. The bill as amended is before us. Anybody wish to be recorded negative? Seeing none, it'll pass to the floor unanimously. Good work, thank you all. You don't have to be here tomorrow. Get some personal work done, constituent stuff. Obviously, Monday is also pro forma, so we'll be back Tuesday. I'm not sure what the schedule exactly looks like, but it'll be more of the same. Thank you, nice job, have a good weekend.
I'll be thinking of you Friday and Monday.
I'll be here Monday.